Hello, hello. I am here in Yongsan in front of the iPark Mall, right by the Han River, and I'm about to meet Tyger. We know each other so well, I don't even know what his last name is. We met once, actually technically twice. I met him once at a startup event, literally for about 30 seconds. And then he went off and I went to a dinner that brings together foreigners over a meal, and I switched tables and I met him. And then we realized, oh, we knew each other, and I found out that he does podcasting, so he is probably way more professional than me. But he does podcasts in the finance world, and he came to Korea recently after deciding that he's just going to buck the trend and go off on his own. And I think he is about to start a business soon. So I said, hey, let's hang out sometime. So we are gonna hang out today. I'm gonna learn about his background. What I do know about him is on LinkedIn, where he went to Stanford for undergrad and then worked at Goldman Sachs for a number of years, then went to a startup, and then decided to take probably quite a bold and a courageous move to leave it all and set off on his own. So today we're gonna find out why he did that. I am personally curious myself. All right, I got confirmation. He is here. Now it is playing a game of Marco Polo. I do not know where he is. You know, even though we both have phones, it is still hard to find people. Where is he? Where is he? You can see, welcome to the iPark Mall. Where is he? Gotcha. Look at this. Oh, let's hold on. I gotta adjust this to the left. And boom, there it is.
I love it.
What's up, man?
How are you?
Good. Yeah, we're just geeking out about, we both have the camera that we're using is the Osmo
Pocket 3.
Pocket 3. Pocket 3. And then we both have mics. We're good.
Yeah.
We have decided to walk around because it's such a beautiful day.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's do it. And then also one thing I realized is last time I shot in 4K. This time I'm going to shoot in 2.7K because why not? I'm just experimenting.
Okay.
And then the frame rate, I noticed at around 30, like when we're walking around, it does a pretty good job of stabilizing us.
Yeah.
But I still felt it's a little bit jittery. So I bumped the frames from 30 to 48. And so I'll experiment with that too.
Nice. And what? How many times have you used this for like podcast recordings?
Ooh, I think you are my 1, 2, like maybe like third, fourth.
Okay. Nice.
Before that, I just did my phone.
Gotcha. So is this the first? You mean this is the first time that you're doing Osmo, or
No,
you
no,
just
no.
did three on here and then?
No,
four you did
total
phone?
of like 6.
Okay.
And then 3 on the phone, and yeah, about
Cool.
3 or 4 on this.
Nice. Nice.
So-
Well, it's a pleasure to be number 3, and it's good for me to also draw some inspiration for like how you're doing this, because
Yeah.
this is a cool setup where you're like walking around. All of mine have been like sitting
Yeah.
just in a desk and just like interviewing people.
Yeah.
But this is cool. It's interactive.
It's funny, it's I'm going tomorrow, my friend's an entrepreneurship professor at Seongyungwan University. So it's SKK, apparently it's like one of the oldest universities in Korea.
Okay.
And he just like has me do like these lectures, and then last time he had me come and he's like, hey, can you talk about like first principle thinking? And I'm like, I mean, I've heard of it. I can go on YouTube, or I can go on Wikipedia and like look at it.
Yeah.
But I've been following Elon Musk a lot, and Elon Musk is a real big fan of first principle thinking. So I had to like look into it, and so I'm gonna give the lecture tomorrow to his entrepreneurship class.
Okay.
And so we did this last semester, and they really liked it. Like apparently it was like one of the highest rated classes.
Wow.
And the funny thing was, it's interesting that it got such a good reaction, because when I was prepping for it, like me and my wife, we do it together. So
Cool.
she's Korean. Where do you want to go? This way, that way?
It doesn't matter to me.
right.
I guess we're gonna get
Well,
blocked off
yeah,
here,
well,
so should we just go this
Yeah,
way?
let's do it.
Yeah.
So my wife is Korean, but she moved to the States when she was like 27. So after when we got married.
Okay.
So it's interesting, like, throughout our like 16 years of marriage, we've never really worked together because she's a musician. She's in piano, I'm kind of in business.
Yeah.
And I remember before coming to Korea, I was like, man, it would be really nice if like we could do it together. And it just happened to be that we started doing things together. And the big reason was, like, I felt like I had pretty good content, but the delivery of it wasn't like hitting, I felt like. Like, for example, I would do a workshop on like how to brainstorm solutions or something. And I'm like, all right, what are some ideas you have? And it's just like, quiet. And I'm like, ooh, tough room.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just happening once. It kept happening over and over. And so I was like, dude, I knew that there was going to be a cultural gap, but this is bigger than I thought, and I don't really know how to overcome this. And coincidentally, my wife volunteered for this training session that was being offered by our children's school, because they were going to Korean school. And it was something called facilitation. And so basically facilitation is kind of like the art of having really effective meetings. And so like really kind of helping people talk, and she was like, Sam, you know, a lot of the things that you're kind of struggling with when you're working with these companies, they're talking about it. They're talking about like tactical ways of how do you get around it. Like, for example, one tactical thing that they talked about was if you have a group of people and you're like, all right, instead of just cold calling, because that's what the Koreans told me to do. They're just like, hey, just Koreans are used to cold calling, like in university and stuff, just cold call them. But I kind of didn't want to do it because the whole point of what I was teaching was like empowerment, and like that kind of goes against it.
Yep.
So one of the ways she kind of has tactics is like, instead of calling on somebody, you would say things like, okay, then how about the next person that goes is wearing a dark color? And so they start kind of self-selecting. They're like, oh, good, it's not me. I was like, oh, I'm wearing dark. Oh, wait, you and me are going dark. Okay, then how about whoever has longer hair? And it's just like, oh, okay. And then you kind of, so it's kind of the same thing as cold calling, but kind of not, because there's some agency. So I thought it was just like a really novel thing. And there were a bunch of other tactics. And what I appreciated was this facilitation was being done, they were Korean facilitators, so they were used to working with Koreans. And so anyway, she started learning it. She got like certification and stuff, and we started working together. So I would work on the content, like first principles thinking, and then she would look over my deck and be like, remove the slide. Hey, this is boring. Insert a icebreaker here. I'll kind of strategically think about what type of icebreaker do I want to insert here in order to prep them for the content that you're going to deliver. So like for brainstorming solutions, I forget, she had something like, talk about something like, I don't know, it was like very, very memorable or something like that to kind of, I was like, why'd you choose this thing? And she's like, oh, it's to get their emotions kind of excited. And I'm like, dude, this is like very strategic, very cool. I don't want to think about this, so I'm really glad you're doing it. So all that to say, yeah, she's gonna be there tomorrow. And so the last time we did this, we were prepping like 15 minutes before we're supposed to go on stage, and I was like not feeling good about the slides, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. I got a bunch of help from ChatGPT, but it was like a bunch. I don't know. I didn't really like it, but it turns out that like it was really good.
That's awesome.
And one thing that Claire told me, what's one thing about doing this with your wife, if you guys can get along well enough, is that she's pretty honest, and she can, and I know it comes from a good place. So I'm not super offended. But one of the things that she says, like, Sam, when you try to make it like you go that way. When you try to make it like too structured, it doesn't come off that well. But when you go off script, it's much better. So I was like, huh, okay. And yeah. So tomorrow, actually this morning we were kind of looking at the slides again. Have some good examples of first principles. Okay, now I remember why I'm talking about this. Okay, I was thinking about your comment about the podcast. I feel like most podcasts, they are, want to make it?
Yep, we'll make it. Nice.
Yes. I can go that way.
Yeah.
Most podcasts are kind of like what you say, like kind of what I'm used to, Lex Friedman.
Yep.
You know, sit down. What are some of the other favorites? Andrew Huberman.
Andrew Huberman for sure. Joe Rogan's the biggest one.
Joe Rogan.
Who else? Let's see. Out of the podcast space has like blown up over the last 5 to 10 years.
Right?
It's crazy. But the thing that's interesting to me is, at least from what I can tell, in Korea, podcasts have not caught on like they have in the States. And I don't know if that's because there's not enough interesting voices in Korea talking about cool things, or what the dynamic is. But it gets me a little bit excited because I'm here in Seoul, I love podcasting, and there's over the course of the last even like few weeks, I've met, I don't know, 5 or 6 people who are doing podcasting in Seoul, and they're bringing good energy. And I think a lot of it is like more of a foreign mindset, which I think is really important with respect to podcasting. But yeah, I know it's super exciting.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll kind of wrap up what I was saying. The reason I was thinking about it is like, the general thing is like, there's reasoning by analogy and there's reasoning by first principles. Have you heard of this?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I feel like reasoning for the viewers, maybe singular of our podcast.
Yeah.
Basically, reasoning by analogy is saying, this is the way that they've done podcasts. I want to do a podcast.
Yep.
I want to see how others are doing podcasts. I'm looking at them. They're sitting in a studio.
Yep.
Good lighting, good mics. That's what I should do. And so that's what they do. The benefit of reasoning by analogy is it's fast. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of thing. So that's reasoning by analogy. First principles is saying, let's throw all that away, or let's challenge every assumption, and let's break this down into components. What is podcasting exactly? It's two people connecting, and what are the variables that can help bring out that connection? Does it have to, and challenging assumptions, does it have to be done in a studio? Can it be done outdoors? Well, there's some challenges of like studio equipment, but you know, we have this Osmo cam and it's capturing us pretty well. So it's like, if, I guess an assumption or a hypothesis is, if we kind of shoot it out here, maybe the production quality won't be as good, but it may be outweighed by the fact that just being outside just helps us kind of like open up and you know, activate a different side of us. By the way, I didn't do all this thinking when I did this. I simply, the only thing, my criteria was, I just want to do something that's fun.
That's awesome. That's a good criteria.
I did do all that analysis.
I mean, I come across a lot of podcasters these days, and it just in terms of how structured the conversations are versus how serendipitous and novel things are. For me, like from personal experience, the ones that I've found the most enjoyment out of in terms of having conversation are the ones where you don't actually know where the conversation is going to go. Right? You don't know. You come prepared with a handful of like things that you want to talk about. But if you are just going A, B, C down the list, it's usually going to be a very like fabricated, manufactured discussion. And it's easy for me to tell when I listen to other people's podcasts when like basically the conversation is just kind of bullshit, and it's just like, this person sent the questions ahead of time, and this person's responding with kind of chat GPT like prompts. Whereas I feel like I can tell pretty quickly when the conversation is truly two people engaging, and they're kind of there's a lot of uncertainty as to where the conversation is going to go, and that's what makes it exciting as well. And I think that's what a lot of like listeners connect with. So the fact that you're bringing a different spin to the podcasting world is it's cool for me to see.
You know, I think kind of like initially, this was like in the second one I did, or the first, after I did the first one. Actually, the first one I did was right over there by the Han River, because my friend lives here, and he's someone who was thinking about doing podcasting. But he has trouble getting started. And so I was like, let's talk about that. Like, let's talk about why is that hard for you? Like, what are some of the struggles that, and like one of the struggles that he mentioned was, he's not super technologically savvy, and he wants to do ASMR. And so, because people have told him like his voice sounds good, and so he's like, okay, but he recorded an audio on a voice memo, and he went on YouTube. He's like, okay, I'm gonna do this. And you probably know this, but you cannot upload an audio file to YouTube. They only accept video. So he looked at this, and this became this kind of big obstacle for him. And so I'm like, it's so funny because I think like if someone else were to hear about this, they'd be like, dude, what's the big issue? Like, just figure it out. But I understood his heart. Like, when it was so hard for him to even get to this point, and then you face any obstacle, you're just like, oh, I'm tired. And he's like, look, I could probably figure it out in like 5 minutes, but it's more like the mental, the weight of just like, oh, it was so hard for me to get here. Now there's another obstacle. And so I feel like he's a good representative of a lot of people that have like really great ideas, that want to pursue their dreams, but don't. And I'm not blaming them. I'm not judging them. It's just more of like, I'm just trying to understand like why.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's true in so many aspects of life as well. Like even for myself, I have only been more active on social media over the last couple of years. And maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the rationale that I had in my mind was like, I just didn't see any value out of it, and it was mostly a distraction. And I think the reality is for, I don't know, maybe 90% of the population, that's probably true, where social media is really a distraction. But I think there was maybe like, also like this second order dynamic where subconsciously I was also a little bit afraid to kind of just like put myself out there, right? Because whenever you put something out into the open, there's always a fear of judgment that it comes with, right? And to like be tweeting into the void, and it's nobody gives you any attention, it's a very humbling experience, right?
Tweeting into the void, that's so great. Tweeting or podcasting into the void.
Yes, and whenever you start anything new, right? It's like, more often than not, it's just gonna be crickets. And it might be like that for a really, really long time. And it's, I think it's important to go through that period, even if it's like years long where there's like nothing. Because in terms of one's own maturity and in terms of the reason why you're doing something, if the reason why you're doing it is because you're looking for validation, external validation, then you're probably doing it for the wrong reason anyways. Whereas people that are doing it, like I had chosen the infinity sign for the logo of my podcast because to me it was, this is something I'm going to do for the rest of my life, regardless of whether or not there are any economic outcomes that result from it. Like obviously my hope and my aspiration is that there are going to be professional benefits from podcasting as well. And I've already seen that to be true. But I knew that I had to go into it with a mindset of like, this is going to be a lifelong project, because if I said, in 3 months from now, I need this many viewers, or in 12 months from now, I need this many viewers, then my whole approach and my relationship with the podcasting experience would have just been a lot more sour, and I think maybe toxic to my life overall.
What do you mean by that? Like, can you give me an example, like being toxic? Like, is that from personal experience, or is that from seeing people who have gone through this?
Both. I mean, if you look in the like YouTube creator landscape, I feel like oftentimes you find people who they've kind of found a niche in the YouTube community, but their niche is by doing something outrageous or stupid. And the incentive for them to get more clicks or get more views or get more likes is to continue doing that outrageous thing.
So do you mean like Mr. Beast?
Not even Mr. Beast. Like I don't know if you've seen this guy, Nikocado Avocado on YouTube. He's got a kind of a crazy creator arc, but he started getting popular doing like mukbang videos, and he would just eat massive amounts of food online for his viewers. And he would just be like a dramatic character with a lot of enthusiasm.
Okay, got it.
And he started getting a lot of traction.
So he was playing a character.
Yes, and the character that he was playing was starting to merge with like who he was in reality. So it was like hard to differentiate between the two. But originally he was like this vegan who was like relatively fit, and maybe just like overall temperament was much more stable. And then over time he became like really, really obese, and he became like more and more outrageous and a little bit contentious with like the stuff that he was saying online, just for the sake of, I think, trying to get more traffic, get more views, And so I think you just have to be super cognizant of what the incentives are, and to what degree like you pursuing those incentives will like change you as a person. And I feel like it's kind of the same thing with podcasting is like, are you having a podcast with a guest because you are actually genuinely curious about what that person thinks, and you want to engage in like a sincere conversation? Or is it like, oh, this person has a lot of like status and credibility, and if I have them on my podcast, then my podcast is going to blow up, right? Like, I think those are two very different things. And when people ask me like, you know, what does it take to be a good podcast host? Not that I've like figured it out. My whole thing is like, you have to be engaging in it in as sincere a manner as possible, because it's not always about like the quality of the questions that differentiates a good podcast host from a bad podcast host. I think it also matters about like the delivery and the sincerity and like earnestness that you're approaching the conversation with, right?
So I guess you're talking more about the interviewer.
Yes, the interviewer. Well, it's a dual dynamic. Is like, I think the person that's being interviewed can very quickly tell whether or not the interviewer had asked that person to be on the podcast because they, you know, they just wanted to check the box and say, hey, I had this person on my podcast, or because they were like genuinely interested in the person that they were, you know, having a conversation with. And I think that makes a big difference. You know?
I think that's like really fascinating because like for me, so you have like talked to kind of more big name people.
Some, but also some smaller names.
Right.
Yeah, it's a mix.
Right. So, but I guess my point is, for me, it's none. Like, it's actually like the opposite of it. Like the last person I did, so I was down in Daejeon and I was, they needed some judges for like a startups that wanted to go, Korean startups that wanted to go to Vietnam. And so I was like, okay, cool, I'll go. And then one of the startups, his, that guy's waving. I don't think he knows that we're waving. We're recording us, not them.
That's funny.
So he went on and he did not do very well. Like, and we talk about that actually in the podcast. He's like, he did not do well. But I was just like, hey, can you give me his contact information? Like, I'd love to talk with him. Just because like I respect the entrepreneur, you know, I respect the person who's going to go into the arena, you know?
Yeah.
And what he was doing was like traditional, like Korean snacks or something.
Okay.
So it's nothing tech or anything. So, and so I'm like, hey, you want to like do a call? And he's like, you know, I live in Gimpo, around that area. It's about an hour away. You know, I'd be happy to meet you. So I'm like, oh, okay. Well, let's like, you know, instead of coffee, like, why don't we have dinner and we can kind of hang out? And he's a first-time entrepreneur. Like, you know, he's making kind of a lot of like the common mistakes that a first-time entrepreneur does. And, you know, he's got no platform, no nothing. Yep. But I actually find like, I don't know, like me personally, one of the reasons I came to Korea was I'm so, I don't know, just like this endless curiosity, and it's so much fun to hear people's stories and how they grew up and what are some of their life views. And so anyway, like number one, I don't think I really had access to like these high, you know, big people. but number two, like I figured they're getting enough like of their story told. A lot of people are calling them.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in like these kind of underdogs because I also feel like an underdog. And I'm like, I want to hear their stories, and most of them, I think almost all of them have said, this is my first time doing this. Actually, except one. And he's the one who, he's had experience doing podcasts. And after we finished, he's like, that was not at all what I was expecting. We talked for like an hour about like why it's important for humans to be connected. And I remember thinking during the podcast, I was like, oh shoot, like this is, because until then my format for podcasts was like going through their history, like going through their story, and asking questions. Yeah. And we were not at all doing that. We were totally off script. And so I remember like mini panicking of like, oh shoot, what am I talking? But then another moment I was like, you know what? Let's just see where it goes. And then interestingly enough, a lot of the future, when we started going into his business, a lot of it did connect back to this idea of connectivity. Like he brought it up. And I think it was something important to him, like the ability to be able to connect on a human level with anybody. And we talked kind of philosophically about it, but then it went into like business and how whenever he as a foreigner, as a black person who from Louisiana, he goes into a room and a Korean would assume that they have nothing in common. but then he finds things that are in common, and it brings them together. And so I thought it was just like the broader kind of thing is like, it's interesting that I never thought of what you just said, of like trying to kind of chase after, and I get it though. I get the allure. Like if you put it into the YouTube title of like this person, and then you share it on LinkedIn, people are like, oh shoot, I wanna see his story or her story.
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't really I haven't gotten to that stage.
Well, that's awesome that it can be that thing. I mean, I think there's podcasts that start from a place of just like genuine curiosity and authenticity. I think those are the ones that have the most potential. You know, it's like, especially when somebody is doing something new. Like I've never been on a podcast where you're just kind of like walking around having a conversation, right? And part of my...
By the way, I did not plan for us to be on this bridge.
It's a beautiful...
Let's just see where it goes. Let's just see where it goes, man. I don't even know where this goes.
Like one of the things that I think about with podcasting is ultimately you are delivering an experience to the person that you're interviewing, and you're also delivering an experience to the audience, right? And to me, like, this kind of dynamic is you're really delivering like a very original, unique experience, right? Because we're like walking around and having a conversation at the same time. Where if you were doing a traditional, kind of podcast, then I don't know how original or how memorable it would be. Like one of the podcasts that's really interesting is like How We Feast, Hot Ones. Have you seen this guy?
Yeah.
And it's not technically a podcast.
Yeah.
But like, I guarantee you that the people that go on that show, they will remember that interview for the rest of their life because it's associated with a very like visceral, emotional, experience.
Love it.
So it's cool for me to see other people just like trying different takes on the whole podcasting game.
Yeah, I feel like one of the hardest things, like, so when I did the first one, I was like, I started sending it out, the link out to a lot of people. I'm like, hey, what's your feedback? What's your feedback? What's your feedback? What do you think? What do you think? And then my wife was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I just want to make sure it's good. Because in my head, it originally was supposed to be kind of, let's do something that's fun, that I'll enjoy. Because I actually have been podcasting. I started podcasting when like the podcast term first came out, and like at least about in 2005. Really? I was studying abroad here at Yonsei, and Apple had just kind of shared this idea of a podcast, and they, in some of their like Apple programs, you can create a podcast, and so I started creating those as a way to like share what life is like in Korea with my friends back in the U.S. And I still have some of the videos. So as someone kind of, but I stopped doing it for many years because I'm like, why? Like, I guess I kind of lost the joy of it. And I think it went strictly more to an ROI mentality of like, if I invest 5 hours to edit a 5-minute video, like, and what do I get? Yeah. And as you get married and you have kids and you have more responsibilities, the costs go higher and higher. And so it's like, is this worth it? But I just got finished with a client engagement, and I had some time, and I'm like, I think there is this thing about like trying to just go with the flow of your energy. I think I read that somewhere. Someone was like, sometimes you should just like go in the direction of where your energy is taking you. And I was like, I kind of want to shoot some videos. And I don't want to do, like, I watch a lot of podcasts, but kind of like those short edits. Yep. Like my wife saw the first kind of long term, and she's like, how long is this? I was like, oh, this one's like 30 minutes. She's like, oh, that's like too long. I'm not gonna watch it. And I'm like, oh, then you're really not gonna watch the next one because the next one's an hour and a half. Yeah. And then the last one was 3 hours. And because like we had a meal, we walked around. And so like, I think one way, if I am chasing the likes, is when she says, I wouldn't watch that, can you cut it up into a short, like a 1 minute short? I think that if I weren't sure of what my goal was or what my purpose was, I would probably cave to it. But basically what went on in my head is, this isn't for her. She's not my target audience. So it's okay. Yeah. And then, and thankfully, because I had that kind of mindset, I guess we should go on this way. Yeah. I talked to another friend he was my second interview, and he said he did watch my first one, which was like 30 minutes, and he's like, hey, I really liked it, because he is part of my target audience. Like he normally watches long form content, like an hour, 2 hours, not that big of a deal.
Yep.
So I think like all that to say, you know, kind of being genuine, true to yourself. I think it's because there's going to be a lot of feedback from people around you of like what they think you should be.
Yep.
And if you aren't clear of why you're doing this or what you want out of this, then you will definitely bend to the will of the wind of opinion back and forth.
Yep.
And you know, once again, based off of your goal, that could be okay. Like if you just want, hey, I want to just try to get as many likes as possible. Like my son wants to do a YouTube, he just wants to make a lot of money. So I'm like, hey, you know, that's a good experience.
Yeah.
But I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is, it's really hard to do this continuously. Like last year, I did I was like challenging myself, like trying to make a video a week, try to get to like 50 videos. I didn't. I stopped at like 20. But the point is, like, I stopped. And I think like if this is powered purely by discipline, you can do it. But like you said, like it may lead you to a weird place where you're kind of becoming someone you're not, and unwillingly. Like that's not what you wanted, but it's kind of pulling you there.
Yep.
I think the other way is just like you really enjoy it. Like by you editing the video, by you doing this thing, like if you have fun and you enjoy it and you watch the conversations again when you're editing, you chuckle and you're like, oh, this is really cool. That kind of thing has a staying power. Like
Yes.
you will continue doing that.
Yes.
And I think that's what you were talking about of like, I want to make this something I do for the rest of my life.
Yep. Yep. Well, and it's also, it's funny because my orientation, especially in my early 20s, as I was looking at my career, was very much so make a lot of money and rise in the corporate ranks as quickly as possible, right? And so if somebody were to come to me at that stage in my life and say like, hey, I have this passion project and it gives me a lot of energy, but I know it's not gonna go anywhere, and if I continue to invest time and energy into it, probably nothing will come of it, then I probably would have said like, hey, you should like get your head out of the gutters and focus on your life because there are other things that matter.
Make money and then buy the freedom later, or
Yeah, but it's interesting for me now because I was in the corporate 9-to-5 job for the past 2 or so years, and both there and when I have conversations with people in Korea, it's like a lot of people don't even have any activity that they engage in that gives them hope or joy or energy. And it's very sad if you don't even have that 1 or 2 things in your life, right? And so now I look at it a lot differently, where it's continue to invest your time and energy in things that give you more hope for the future. And even if nothing is gonna come of it necessarily, like the fact that that thing gives you energy and a little bit of aliveness is in and of itself is worth it. Because there's, like in my opinion and my change of view over the last couple of years, is that there are people that have like all the things that societal success would say are the things to acquire, whether it's like a lot of important, valuable relationships or a lot of wealth. And at the same time, they're miserable because they don't really have hope or optimism for the future. It's just like, they're just trying to play status games. And so, I think like whenever I come across somebody that has some sort of a passion for anything, I try and pour like a little bit of fuel into the fire of like, don't stop that, right? Like, keep going. Because that thing that maybe gives you even like a little bit of hope for tomorrow or for the next week or for the next year, like that's invaluable, I think.
So I'm doing this book club when my wife started a book club.
Oh, nice.
So she came to Korea. She said the story many, many times, but she's like, I basically read in my entire life like maybe 10 books. Like she doesn't like books. But then she came here in Korea. It was a big shock to our system. Like when we came, we didn't have a job, like kind of just like, not winged it, but kind of winged it. But the difference, and I know you're kind of doing that too. But we have, a family and we have kids, and it's a little bit more complex. And so it was a lot of stress. And for her, she got somehow involved with somebody who was doing a book club. And it was actually part of a business in network marketing. And they had their incentive of getting people into this book club, really thinking about business, entrepreneurship, and then they'll eventually leave their jobs and pursue this full time. And I'm like, hey, that's cool. But she wasn't really interested. She was open to it, but she was more interested in the book club. And so they were intense. They met 6 days a week.
Wow, that is very intense.
6 a.m. 6 to 7 a.m. every day.
Wow. How many people were part of this book club?
Dude, there were like 10, 15, wow. and they were very strict. So they had a rule that if you did not show up for like X amount of days or weeks, they kick you out.
Wow.
So they're basically pruning and making sure the quality is really high. So I thought that was like really cool.
Yeah.
But she started reading business books, and like it started opening her eyes. And so she's like, hey, I like this. I kind of want to do this on my own. So she started, and we started in January. So we meet Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. And we go through about a book every 2 weeks.
Wow.
So at first, the people that were willing to join, like her network, were coaches and facilitators. So we were reading all these books on coaching, and I was like, can we pick another book? I think. And then after a few weeks, I was able to give my suggestion. So I was like, I don't want to read any more books on coaching. I want to read an autobiography, and I've always wanted to read Shoe Dog.
Ah, yes.
Did you read it?
Of course. It's amazing.
And what was really amazing was some of the things that were happening in the book, I felt like it was happening in my life. So, you want to go down there?
Yeah, we can go down there.
Let's do it. So it was so interesting, and my takeaway from the book is just like, entrepreneurs are just like a kick in the balls continuously. And it's normal. He's like normalizing it. He's like, Nike was on the brink of bankruptcy like so many times.
Right.
And I think that was like really kind of elite, like it was kind of nice to hear. And I think the interesting part was at the end of the book, he says, and I wish I could go back and do it all over again. Even after talking about how painful it was. So anyway, the current book that we're reading is, have you ever heard of the Creative Act?
By Rick Rubin. Yeah.
Rick Rubin. Did you read it?
I haven't, but I've had it recommended to me very many times, and I also listen to Rick Rubin's Tetragrammaton podcast every once in a while. So I'm a Rick Rubin fan.
Wow,
for sure.
okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know much about him. I just had heard about it, so I just threw it out there, and I started reading it, and I think the first few chapters, I was like, shoot, this is a mistake. It was so philosophical. He was just like, the act of creating is the essence of it. I'm just like, what the heck am I reading? Like, what the heck? I thought he's gonna have like fun stories and not much. He doesn't name anybody. But what was interesting is starting around in the middle of the book, I started getting like really into it.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons is like, he says things like, so everyone has like a stereotype of what an artist is.
You want to go this way or this way?
Let's go this way.
Yeah.
Like the stereotype of an artist is someone who can draw well, who can create really good music. And shoot, we just finished a book today, and I forgot what he said, but basically he's widening the definition of an artist and saying when you are creating something new and you are expressing yourself, that is art. Like, you are an artist. And so I thought that was like really interesting, because like I never was musically inclined, though I enjoyed it. I was never artistically inclined, but like right now what I'm doing is I'm creating like a program to help startups validate their ideas much quicker. Like, instead of taking 3 months, I want them to validate in like 3 hours, like that kind of thing. And it's been something I've been, for the past 2 years, that's what I've been doing. But I've been trying to like create a V2. Like, I'm using first principles thinking of like, this is the way that I've done it until now, but what is the core essence that I'm trying to do, and let's build it from the ground up. Like, so I'm in that process right now, and I'm reading this book about creating, and he talks about the creative process, and I'm like, dude, like, he's talking about building music, but it resonates so much with me building out a program for startups. And it started kind of widening the aperture of like, what is an artist, and am I an artist? Like, I think I'm an artist. And here's this like big time Grammy Award winner saying like, anyone who creates new things and shares their perspective, their view of the world, they're an artist. And I'm like, maybe I'm an artist. So it kind of, and he gets very philosophical with his life views of like, I think the purpose of life is to share and express who you are. But I think that ties to kind of like what you're saying of like, I feel that you view podcasting as kind of part of, kind of more in that realm.
It's a much more artistic endeavor than it is anything else, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
and like while you do it, like sure, if money comes, that's great. If it leads to business things, that's great. But from what I can tell just by talking with you, it doesn't seem like that's the primary or even the alternate, like the secondary. It's almost like the primary is, I don't know, like what is the primary actually? I guess I should just ask you.
Yeah, that's and I've thought a lot about this too, is, you know, and I didn't realize this 4 or 5 years ago, but I'm 27 now, about to be 28, and I feel like Abraham Maslow, the developmental psychologist, has this saying that like, to know what you truly want is like a great psychological feat, because it's hard for us to know like what it is that will make us happy and what it is that we want in life. And in terms of like how I hope the next handful of decades go and what my day-to-day would actually look like, there are really like 3 core pillars in terms of like well-being and happiness that are super essential to me that I don't want to sacrifice. And those pillars would be like, one is having conversations with people that I find interesting and that I enjoy engaging in intellectual discussions or philosophical discussions or business discussions, anything. Like conversation is such like a big and important piece of my life, specifically because I have been like a podcast addict since like my college days. And so that's had a big impact. So that's like one pillar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, why were you a podcast addict? Like what led for you to be drawn to it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, so I graduated from Stanford in 2019 and studied economics. And just in terms of like my own personality, I am very much like an introvert. And so I always had like headphones on, you know, like if I was in the cafeteria or if I was working out. And maybe
like the big over-the-ear headphones, or just like kind of more
combination
subtle?
of both. Okay, combination of both. Yeah, depending on the situation.
Sends a signal, you know. One sends a little bit of a stronger signal.
Yeah.
Don't come near me.
But there was a Stanford professor named Russ Roberts, and he had a podcast called Econ Talk, and I had caught wind of it just from a friend, I think, on campus. And I started listening to his podcast, and it was the first one that I started listening to. And it was really his podcast that kind of opened up the rabbit hole of the podcasting ecosystem in like 2015, 2016 timeframe for me. And I realized that...
Was it just all about econ?
Initially, a lot of the episodes were like specifically econ focused, but he eventually like branched out in terms of having discussions on interesting books that he read, political issues, religion, like a whole bunch of other stuff as well. So
was that a pro for you, or was that a con?
I really appreciated the fact that he broadened out, because I like economics is definitely interesting to me as a subject matter.
Right.
But my curiosity spans, you know, in many different directions as well. And so I really appreciated the fact that he would branch out a little bit. So yeah, all that to say is he was the one that opened my eyes up to the world of podcasting. And like, and this wasn't the case when I was a teenager, but digesting information via conversation, oftentimes for me is like my preferred medium to digest information. Yeah,
I know what you mean.
As opposed to like sitting down and reading a textbook, which, you know, is just like not as comfortable. So I started just consuming a lot of his podcasts, and then I started consuming a lot of investing podcasts as well. And then other like intellectual people like Joe Rogan early on as well. So that's kind of the beginning of my podcasting addiction. But I would always just like have podcasts playing in the background. So if I'm walking to class, if I'm doing chores at home, if I'm going to the gym, like I was probably listening to like 3 podcasts per day on average.
Dang.
Yeah. And then
that's like pretty intense.
Yeah, it started to get a little bit too intense, where I would like crank up the speed to like 1.5, 2x.
That's what I do.
You know? And it was just like non-stop podcasts all the time. So yeah, it's that's the podcasting pillar. Is I've always been passionate about it, and it's been like a core part of my life. So now that I'm actually doing podcasts and having conversations with people is a lot of fun.
That's interesting. You know, hearing your story kind of makes me think about like, for me too. Like, so I graduated high school in 2003. Went to UC San Diego, and so I would, but I would serve at a church that was in North Hollywood. So I would make the commute every weekend, and so it's about a 3-4 hour round trip. And so at the time, I mean, iPod was kind of becoming a thing, and then, but I would have CDs, and CDs can only pack so much things. And so what I would often listen to is, I think I would listen to like sermons, because there was a pastor I liked, so I would listen to sermons, but I got so used to associating driving with listening. And it's just like sometimes music, but most of the times it was like sermons. And then I always loved tech podcasts. So there was this podcast called This Week in Tech.
Was that J-Cal?
J-Cal was in it.
Okay.
He was an occasional guest. And then he kind of blew up, you know, with, what is it? The All In podcast. Like,
yes.
I listened to All In podcast.
I listened to them as well.
Yeah. But no, Leo Laporte, he did all this technology stuff. And funny enough, like, I was drawn to it because I just love tech. But for me, the idea of doing tech for a career never occurred to me. Because I went into the Marines right after. And so I, in my head, separated my job and like my hobby. And tech was my hobby, but that was not my job. That's not where you make money. Yeah. And funny enough, like when I was getting my MBA, I like applied for the consulting things, got rejected. But then I went to a tech position like on the whim, and I was able to talk about it. And I think it surprised them because they're like, on the resume, it's like there's nothing tech. It's just military. But I had been consuming podcasts, tech podcasts, for the past 10 years. And just like always, because I'm like, oh, the new Apple thing came out, that's awesome. And I think maybe it's because like, I didn't have many people around me who I can talk to about these interests. And so to be able to, they almost became like friends. And it wasn't just the transmission of information, because I could get that information on go to macrumors.com. It wasn't that, it was more so like the rapport. And they started becoming kind of like a friends, you know, just the way they joke and I laugh. And so, and I too also think like I process better some topics through conversations. Like some people, they're just like, don't talk to me, I'm gonna go Google it. I'm gonna find out about this topic, but I actually more like this podcasting angle, or I don't know about podcasting, but just to be able to have a conversation and to think about it, and
In terms of a form of learning, like podcasting is so unique because you, especially if you're the one engaging in the conversation, whether you're the host or the interviewee, it's like, it is a very real-time form of learning. And I feel like if you're learning in a classroom, it's so easy to just like space out in the background because your attention isn't being demanded of you at all times. Whereas when you're in a conversation, it's like, you're expected to be hearing the other person, what they're saying. And you're also hopefully, offering up something novel or interesting to like move the discussion forward. So I feel like as a form of learning, and also like speaking as a form of communication is perhaps like one of, if not the most powerful skills to learn in life. And if you looked at me like before I started doing any podcasting versus after, like even my ability to just like communicate interpersonally has gotten a lot better. And there's just like so many benefits I could go on and on about. But,
No, I get something similar to, like my wife, she's mentioned a few times, like she doesn't feel very good at like public speaking. Or, public speaking is okay, but like kind of like this, kind of like, I don't know, just like speaking in kind of smaller groups, like she felt like she didn't know what to say, but she kind of was forced in this book club. So the way the book club works is you're supposed to read the passage, and then you come together, and then they go around in a circle. Basically, you talk about what you read and your insight. So you have to like every day come in and be able to condense what you want to say and communicate it. And so it's just training. Just doing it over and over. And what's interesting is like, so this is in Korean, and so like I was a little hesitant to join. She's like, you're gonna join my book club, and I'm like, it's in Korean though. And she's like, no, but we'll read books that are in English. You can read it in English. You can do Korean. But I'm like, but I gotta do it in Korean. But I think a lot of times I'll admit I tune out. I hope they're not watching this. They're probably not watching this. I hope they're not. But a lot of times I tune out.
Yeah.
But with this book, The Creative Act, I actually was quite tuned in, and some of them noticed it. They're like, Sam, you're a lot more like bright, and I was like, yeah, oh, it's shocking. But what's interesting is that it kind of forced me to get good at like doing it in Korean and also listening to them. And so it's not like, I think, I mean, I don't know how important it is to you, but one of the things that I had to kind of reconcile in my head is like, how important will it be for me to actively study Korean while I'm here in Korea? Because I've always wanted to become fluent. But now I know how much work needs to go in order for me to get there.
Yeah.
I'm kind of at the point of diminishing returns, but that doesn't mean I don't want to get better, but I don't want to actively learn.
Yeah.
However, in this book club, I'm kind of doing it for my wife, but it's kind of a forum where I could sharpen my Korean skills. So I realized having done this since January, so it's been 10 months, or 9 months of doing this, like I was in a different arena, like it was like a workshop, and I was just observing. And then suddenly one of the people leading the workshops like, Sam, like, would you say something? And I wasn't paying attention to what they were saying. I was kind of zoned out, and everyone's looking at me. And so normally I would like, if it's in English, I could probably BS my way in. But with Korean, it's like, but then I think it just came out. I think in my head, I'm just gonna be like, I just said, I'm just gonna talk about what I want to talk about. And so I just started throwing stuff, and people were like, oh. So I was like, okay, good, it worked.
That's awesome.
I thought about like, how was I able to do this? It was just happened to be because of this book club and practicing talking and communicating your ideas, and then kind of sparring. It's almost like, it is like mentally sparring to sharpen our ideas, right? I mean, I think that's why I really like the Paul Graham essay about writing, and the reason writing is so effective is you get to spar with yourself and have other people spar asynchronously.
100%. Yeah. There's nothing more humbling than thinking that you have some sort of intelligence or novel ideas, and then you go and try and put that into writing, and just like nothing makes sense, That is, I've been trying to write at least on a monthly basis, and I just like send my writing to people that I have like met over the course of my lifetime, mostly like my professional career.
Is this like a newsletter?
Yeah.
Like a Substack?
It's not a Substack. It's like it's just like a personal newsletter, and I just like compile a bunch of like personal projects that I'm working on, like the podcast is one. And that practice has been like so valuable, because it's so easy to try and write something and then freeze up and say, hey, I'm just gonna not do it this month. But now that I have like a forcing function to, my audience is like expecting something, this month. So.
Did you say that you're gonna send something every month? Did you say that?
I didn't say it, but it's something that I've been doing for the last 2 years or so.
Oh wow!
So it's like a September summary, October summary,
November
wow. Summary.
Got
like
it.
Yeah.
That is a forcing function.
Yeah, which has been awesome. But even to your point of like language learning, is I am kind of in a pilot period with Seoul right now of over the next 2 to 3 months, like, do I see a future that I could build here in terms of some of the things that I'm most interested in?
Yeah.
And if the answer is like yes, then I'll stay through 2025, but I'm still trying to make that evaluation. And obviously the Korean language learning becomes a lot more important if I decide to stay here on a longer term. And the one thing that I've been observing, even with like English, people that know English in Korea, is a lot of people know it intellectually, of like they can read, they can write, but they can't interact with people. And I think it's the same way with Korean as well, is it's a lot easier to digest text or just like be comfortable, but to be in conversation where there's like uncertainty and it's a lot more interactive is a whole different game. It's like the most important part of like being able to speak.
Where you want to?
Should we start heading back in the same direction? Yeah,
we can do that.
And I was just going to say, in terms of how language learning relates to podcasting as well, is like, I think podcasting is, like when you're in high school, if you're a part of any club or athletic organization, and you're on a team, and you have some sort of a performance, right? And there's some sort of build up to the performance, and you don't know how you're going to do, but you're training and you hope you'll do well. Like, I feel like for most people, at least that I know in my life, they don't have as many of those opportunities to kind of test themselves. And even for me, I look at podcasting as kind of a way to impose a little bit of stress of like, you know, you want it to be a good experience for the person you're interviewing. You want it to be a good experience for the people that are listening to the podcast. And this is your kind of opportunity to perform in some sense, right? And I feel like the more of those types of like small bouts of stress that you can inject into your life, like the more progress is made. And so I just think like podcasting is that, using it as that kind of, it's almost like going to the gym to some extent, is like super healthy. Because people that just don't engage in conversation, I think you can tell pretty quickly, like when you start to try and have a dialogue with them, that's not something that they do regularly. And I think it's so important.
Yeah, I think like there's an equivalent of, what is it? It's like a piano recital. Like for kids, it's not necessarily, I mean, the primary purpose is for the parents because they think it's super cute. But it's also, it is a small dose of training. Like when our son was young, my wife made it a point, like he was going to Korean school in Boston, and she made it a point for him to go into all these singing competitions. And her primary reason was she wanted him to become comfortable being on stage. And now he is quite comfortable. So he's just like, yeah. And I think that kind of, was it because of the training or was it because he's naturally kind of extroverted? Like an example is when we moved to Korea, we were out of school for 6 months and then we went to another school, Korean school, and it was his first day. So we had to move in the middle of the semester, and brand new kids, he's in 5th grade, and he's like, oh, hi everybody. And then it just happened to be that day they were voting for like the class president or the class representative or whatever. And someone's like, hey, Liam, you should do it. And the teacher's like, oh, like, no, like he just came. And he's like, okay, I'll do it. And then, but to do it, you have to go in front of the class and do a speech. And so he's like, okay, I'll do it. And granted, like we spoke to him in Korean since he's young. That's his first language. But his English is much stronger. But he's like, okay, I'll do it. And he did it in Korean. And I think like he didn't get it. The other person got 9 votes, but he got like 7.
Wow.
And so when I heard that story, like my wife kind of shares that story often of just like, that's kind of who he is, and I think one of his strengths. And then I think like as a parent, like one of the things that we want to do is observe our children and see like where are some of the potential, you know, like strengths and that we can lean into, and we can try to give him more opportunities to develop. But so anyway, it's like the piano recitals, like that's one example. I think other smaller, like those types of challenges are like 5Ks, 10Ks, you know, whatever. And I used to, in my ROI mentality, be like, what is the point of this? Who cares if you run 5K, if you do an Ironman, like, but I think now there's maybe 2 things that I'm thinking. Number one, what you said, of there is a benefit of us just like going to the gym to physically challenge ourselves, to mentally or whatever us challenge ourselves. And when we do that, we become stronger, and that translates to other parts of our lives. So it basically is this continual you know, evolution of ourselves. The second reason was we were reading this other book called Flow. So I think a lot of people understand the concept of flow, but this book like went really deep into it. And one of the things that he talked about is like, when you're in flow, you're so engrossed in what you're doing, and you don't think about anything. You don't have any space to think about anxiety, nothing. You're only thinking about this. And people get addicted to that feeling. But when they get into that feeling, like it makes them feel happy, and this joy that you were talking about, and it gives them like a sense of purpose. And that's when something clicked in my head. I'm like, now I'm like a really big fan of like these other small things like 3K, 5K, or whatever. But now I realize it's like, it gives them a taste of this purpose. Like if it's not the big capital P purpose, but at least lowercase p, of just like giving them some hope, of something that brings them joy. Because we can't all be, you know, having millions of dollars and doing whatever we want. We have to sometimes make trade-offs and do things that we have to work somewhere where we don't like. But in the middle of that, can we still find little h hope of doing these things? And maybe in the grand scheme of things, it has no impact on society. But maybe it does because it gives me hope, and that has a chain reaction of me affecting society. I don't know, I'm getting kind of philosophical, but I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah.
No, I think it's both of those things are great points, and especially in terms of like your son or whatever, like the thing that I always think about is, which is so important, especially when you're young, is the little decisions that you make can often have like cascading impacts on your future and also on like identity formation. So it's like, once you start to take inaction, and let's call it like volunteering to become the president at his school, right? That then like kind of gets ingrained into his identity as like, I am somebody who, when given opportunities, tries them, right? Whereas maybe if instead he just decided like, I'm not going to do it this time, and then that becomes an ingrained part of his identity, and the next time an opportunity comes up, he says to himself like, I'm not the type of person who does those things, And it's,
hey, by the way, would you be cool with us hang out a little bit?
Yeah, right here.
Yeah.
Cool.
I like. I've been trying just like scene changes. Last time I shot with the river in the back, so I kind of don't want to do it. We can just like do it like this way. Cool. Is that cool?
Yeah, that works.
All right. Continuing.
I think I was talking about like identity formation.
Yeah,
identity and part formation. Of the reason why it's interesting for me is like, it's crazy to me how consequential like small decisions can be to somebody's career path. And I find with a lot of my friends in college, especially the ones that ended up going into finance, it's like the reason that they chose a finance track is because, well, in part maybe their social environment told them like, hey, this is something that you should pursue and it's something that's high status. But then seeing that each subsequent decision is just built on that initial decision is pretty crazy to think about. Where I think I have a lot of friends who now are in finance and they're kind of like, I'm not exactly sure why I decided to do this, and to kind of shake yourself out of that social inertia when you've invested so much time and energy into a path is a very hard thing to do. And so it's something I think a lot about.
Yeah, that reminds me of like the idea of golden handcuffs. So you get used to a certain lifestyle because you make a certain amount of salary. But you hate your job. But to leave your job, I have a friend who, what is it? It's like something in tech. Something in tech, making good money, has kids, but doesn't really like her job. Doesn't like her job. And so I'm like, what would you do? And she's like, I think maybe nursing. I'm like, are you interested in trying? And she's like, it's so hard. I got kids, like I'm over 40, like it's such a big change. And I think to your point, I was kind of asking like, how did you get here? And like, I was basically, my parents told me like, I think I should go in this route. And I think that's like, overall, that's like a really interesting thing that was said, right? It's like, in an absence, when you don't know where you want to go, and you don't even have to be right, because there's no like, so a lot of Koreans, what I hear what I feel from them is they want their 정답, right? What is the right answer? A, B, C, D, which one is it? Which is presupposing that there is a right answer. But I think like, it doesn't even have to be that. It doesn't even have, there is no right answer, first of all. There's just kind of better answers and worse answers. But even in the middle of that, like, ideally, like some of the things that we're thinking about for our kids is like, what is our role as parents? I think our role is to prepare them to leave the nest, to prepare them to leave the nest and to become active and productive members of society. And what is the best way of doing that? I think it is to understand like what are their superpowers and to understand what are their interests. Like the whole, the previous guest, our previous podcast guest, she mentioned like Japanese concept of like, dang it, it's something like Ikigai. Yes. Yes. What is it?
No, I don't know the definition, but it's it's like there's like three circles, right? And it's like the intersection of these three circles.
Yeah.
Is one like financial?
One is like you can make money and kind of society finds value from it.
Yeah. One is you can make money, and then the other is like a personal passion.
Yep.
Right. And then what is I don't remember the
I think the third thing is like, are you actually good at it?
Ah, yes. Okay.
Because you can have a passion for it, and society might need it, but you suck at it.
Yes. I've heard the concept thrown out there many times.
Yeah.
And it's a good one. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably that. It's because like, if my son finds his thing, and another kind of, I've heard it in kind of coaching circles, it's called like the zone of genius. Very similar concept. Zone of incompetence, you suck at it, don't do it.
Yeah.
Zone of competence, you're somewhat good at it, but not great. Don't do it. Zone of excellence, you're better than others and people pay you for it, but you don't like it. And zone of genius is you like it. So ideally you're in the zone of genius. It's very similar idea, but it's like if we can do our best to kind of set the environment so that he can find his zone of genius, I think that would be the ideal. But in lieu of that, or based off of like parents' insecurities or their fears that they experience, because a lot of parenthood is like transmitting your fears onto your children. Like I was frustrated with my inability to speak Korean, so I made it a point to speak Korean with my kids. Even to the point where sometimes it would harm the relationship, where he would use English, I'd be like, I told you not to use English. And I'm like, wait, what's going on here? Like, I think I'm losing the whole point of this. And so I've relaxed after that. But I think our goal is to like help nurture that. And the thing is like, but once again, if you're fearful of it, and especially here in Korea, where they grew up, like our parents grew up in the age of the Korean War, and there was a lot of instability, third world country and all that, and they're just like, survive, work your butt off and survive. And that's kind of what was passed on to them. And so it does make sense where they're like, you don't know what you want to do? I'll tell you then. The sure path of tech, doctor, lawyer, or whatever, right? But I think, you know, what you're talking about is we get to the point where society, like we're not in the survival mentality anymore. Like we're kind of in this more like self-actualization, like what do we want to do? What do we find meaning? And I find that a lot of like, at least what I've heard is the Gen Z in Korea, maybe somewhat in the US as well, is like, they want to know what the mission of the company is, which beforehand, nobody cared about that. It's just like, what's the salary? But now it's like, I want to know, I can work somewhere else. I don't need to work here, but I want to know, is there something that is bigger than myself? Like, I think people want to be be a part of something bigger.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and it's funny for me coming into Korean society as like a complete foreigner, because...
Have you been to Korea before?
One time before, it was like 4 or 5 years ago, and it was only for like a week-long vacation. So aside from that, I had never been.
And you're, maybe this is the part where I want to learn a little bit about you. You're Korean American?
Yeah, my parents immigrated to the States when they were like 5, 6 years old.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they're very assimilated into, you know, American.
How good is their Korean?
Not very good. Like they speak to my my grandparents in Korean, but it's usually like half Korean, half English.
So that's like my generation. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So like on a 0 to 10 scale, I'm like a 1 or a 2 in terms of, you know, Koreanness.
Did they make it a point to teach you Korean or Korean culture?
I think they made it a point maybe not to teach me Korean.
Really?
Yeah. Is they maybe were worried about like having an accent and stuff like that.
I mean, but they didn't have an accent, right? I mean, they came at 5.
Yeah, they didn't have an accent. To be honest, I don't know exactly all the reasons why, but like even they used to be a part of like a Korean American church, right? Yeah. And I think they didn't want to be part of that community any longer, like their respective communities, and so they like left over time, and so like then they were part of like a multicultural American church, right? So they have much more of like, I would say, an American mindset compared to some of my like Korean American friends whose parents kind of had the more traditional Korean background of like study academics. Like my parents didn't really push me academically. Like athletics was actually more of an important factor in my family. So pretty unusual background in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you probably have more in common with my son because I was born and raised in LA, but my parents were like fresh, you know, from Korea. So a lot of that influence was still pretty strong. But even then, most of my friends, you know, their Korean sucked. My Korean sucked. But it was more after a point where I'm like, I want to know my heritage. I want to get better at the language so that I can talk to my parents. A lot of that was kind of that was the motivation. But you don't even have that. You're just like, you're good. You can talk with your parents.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my grandparents will speak Korean to me, and then their English is okay. So then I'll speak English back to them, and they'll understand me.
Are they in America?
No, they're in Chicago.
Oh, okay. So they're in Chicago, yeah.
They immigrated, like, you know,
got it. Your grandparents,
yeah. My grandparents did, yeah. So, I mean, it would still be cool if I could learn Korean well enough to have conversations with my grandparents, because I think the depth of the relationship would be a lot stronger if I could speak to them in their, you know, native tongue.
Are you curious though?
Am I curious?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
About their life.
Oh, of course.
Like,
Yeah. I'm very curious. I don't know if it's to the same extent. Like, I have always been more curious about like Korea and my heritage than like my siblings. So I'm one of 6 kids in my family.
Dang.
And I feel like for my older brother and my older sister, like, I guess they were kind of proud of like their Korean heritage, but they also like, it wasn't a huge part of their identity growing up, you know? Whereas for me, like, I, for a long time, had thought it would be cool to spend some time here, learn about the history, all of that stuff. So yeah, don't know why necessarily, but yeah, here I am.
So you were born and raised in Chicago? Okay, born and raised in Chicago.
Yeah.
Where, like Chicago City?
No, so like 25 minutes northwest from this like downtown area. So
where?
Arlington Heights is the town.
Arlington Heights, okay.
Yeah, Buffalo Grove, kind of Schaumburg area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And so you grew up there, one of 6 kids, dang. And you are number
3, but it's kind of a weird dynamic because my older 2 siblings and myself were like within a 3-4 year gap, and then there's an 8-year gap between me and my next younger sibling. So I have 3 younger siblings who are like high school, college age right now. So it's like I was the youngest, but then I was also like the oldest at the same time. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what was the journey from that to Stanford? Like, what was that like?
Well, I am like by nature a pretty competitive person, I would say. And a lot of the competitive energy for myself and from my parents was mostly in sports. So like travel soccer was a huge piece of my life growing up. And like the hope was always to do that on a competitive level. But then as I got into high school, academics was something that I pushed myself on just because I had like high expectations for myself. And so
your parents didn't push you?
No, they wanted me to always to do my best, but they always wanted me to just like do whatever kind of made me happy or what I was like most curious and interested about. And I was also like homeschooled for a little while. Like my mom homeschooled me and my older 2 siblings.
Really?
Yeah. So her whole like approach to education is very different from, you know, traditional schools of thought. So
really?
Yeah, she took us to like a lot of field trips and did a lot of like self-study, like in terms of history and all that stuff.
From when to when were you homeschooled?
This would have been up until like 7th or 8th grade.
From when you, like kindergarten?
Yeah, I guess like maybe kindergarten and the first few years of elementary school. I went to regular school because my mom was working, but maybe like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. Yeah, for like a 3-year period we were homeschooled. So it wasn't, I guess it wasn't the entirety of my education, but if it was up to my mom, she would have continued to do it longer.
But what happened?
My younger siblings, it just became too much.
Got it.
Yeah.
So fun. Did I mention that our kids are being homeschooled right now?
Really? No, you didn't.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So we pulled them out of Korean school and
Wow.
they're homeschooling since February.
Okay. How's that going?
Oh, it's tough.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I mean, from both parties.
Yeah.
Both parties, it's tough, but I think it's good because it's kind of like the difference between outsourcing and like you just outsource your kids' education. You're just like, oh, school will do a good job. I'll send them to Hagwon, reasoning by analogy, right? But then first principles is like, what is our goal and what are the base components and like what are some assumptions we had and like, are we doing what we can to set them up for success? And for my son, I think what we noticed is like, I noticed this trend early on. Like his teachers would be like, oh, he kind of gets sloppy when he wants to like rush to recess or something. So it's like, okay, I didn't think much of it, but I think now we're homeschooling, and like my wife is like face to face with it. And really, I think we both feel like our one thing that we need to focus on is to help him overcome this. Like sometimes in life you can't always do what's fun. Like you have to just grind it out, and you have to learn that. And it's almost like it's kind of a fork in the road. And it's like, if we can catch this now, and if we can train him so that he learns this muscle, then he's good. Like after that, like it's more just like guiding him. But right now it's like this kind of moment. So I think we're really glad in that sense. But it's challenging.
Yeah.
It's challenging.
Yeah.
But I think there are pros. Like there's like benefits, like such as you can finish your schoolwork like by lunchtime.
Yeah.
And then in the afternoon you do sports and whatever, right?
Right.
Like they went water skiing yesterday. So it seems like that. Is that what you remember during those years of your life?
Yeah, and it wasn't all like altogether free form. So there these homeschooling co-ops that exist.
Yeah.
Right? And so like on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday dynamic, we would for a few hours go into like a more formal school setting, and then like on Tuesdays and Thursdays it would be like my mom teaching us, or we'd be going on field trips and things like that. So there were like many different iterations that we had tried, but
it really is like a startup.
Yeah.
I don't know if you like talked with your mom about her experience through that, but at least for Claire as a parent going through this, it really feels like a startup. It's just like you first principles everything. You're just like, hey, let's try this, let's try that, let's try this. It's like, oh, that didn't work. Whereas before you didn't have to do that. You just, the extent of your kind of concern is just getting them to school and then bring them back, and then do they get good grades. But now you have to like come up with, I mean, even if you use a curriculum, how do you teach a curriculum? How do you know when they have mastery? When do you move on? Like, what do you introduce? How do you blend sports and all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very interested in like education in general, just because it feels like there is so much room for disruption to occur. But when you actually get to the nuts and bolts of like, okay, well then what does the perfect curriculum look like from the ground up? It becomes very, very difficult to implement in practice.
Yeah, the logistics of it.
Yeah, the logistics. And it's also like, for me, I was like kind of antisocial. Like I was very introverted, and I was like afraid to engage with strangers in conversation and things like that. And so for me, it was kind of like a great and comfortable environment for me to be in, being homeschooled. But I think that when I entered the public school system and was forced to engage with more people and interact with them, that was ultimately like beneficial to me. Whereas like my older siblings, like the social dimension was such a crucial part of their lives. Like my older brother is like a very social person, and same with my older sister. And for them to not have that ecosystem every single day, to be having friends and just hanging out, like it was really hard for them, So it's also like the education needs to be kind of adapted to the individual as well. And for me, like academically, it made a lot of sense that Stanford was, I think, the right path for me, because I'm very good at like sitting myself down and studying and like, just being like very conscientious with like how I go about life. But my brother is much more of like a hands-on learner, and he doesn't learn well when somebody tries to like sit him down and lecture to him, And so we had such different styles as well. And like experiencing that made me have a deeper appreciation for how hard the education puzzle is to solve for everyone, because everybody's so different.
So in one sentence, how would you describe those years as at homeschool?
At homeschool? I remember it as being fun and enjoyable, but not optimal for my future development, just because of my personality. Yeah. And I really, I think it maybe has impacted my life in ways that I don't actually understand, because I do have an appreciation for like non-conventional forms of instruction now, and I'm really grateful that
what's
like
an
my
example?
mom did that. Like even learning through conversation, for example, like I feel like that's very much a form of education, right?
Yeah.
And that's not something that they really teach you in formal school system. Not for the most part.
It's just logistically they can't.
Yeah.
They can't have conversations all day. They got like scores that they have to get their kids to go through.
Yes.
And it's all about incentives.
Yes. And I mean, I think if I just think about how important it is to pair your learning with experiences. Like being homeschooled gave me a lot of that, because my mom was trying to be very proactive in taking us to like museums and on field trips, like almost every week, every other week, she would try and do that, you know? And having those like in-person experiences has such a bigger impact on your ability to retain knowledge and information than you memorize it for the test, and then once the test is done, who the hell knows?
Wiped clean.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's it's definitely had a big impact on my life, and I would hope to think that in the future I could like homeschool my kids as well. But I also realize that it's going to be a lot harder than whatever I expect it to be. You know?
Yeah, there's some other conversations we could have probably next time about like what the future of education is going to be in light of AI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's some crazy stuff.
I'm pretty deep in that world as well.
Are you?
So anyway, by the way, what's your time like?
I should be good for another like 30 minutes or maybe 40 minutes. Just like around 6:30, I'll probably have to take off.
Okay. Then do you want to start walking back now?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Let's do it.
Cool.
Another switch. So, all right, tell me about your Stanford experience.
I guess, what do you want to know about my Stanford experience? Just like how I would rate it overall?
Just whatever comes to your mind.
Stanford experience, it was very good, I think, for my development. I think I wish I would have known a lot of what I know now going into Stanford, because my thinking going in was that long term I wanted to be some sort of investment professional and make a lot of money. And I thought that I was just like had a deep passion for stocks and investing, which I do have a passion for it, but that was the sole focus. And so I took academics very seriously, because the idea was like I do well in school, I get a good job coming out of graduating, and that would set me up on that career path. And I also felt like maybe from the background that I had, just not having as many like resources or not being as in tune with all the academic resources that a lot of my peers had coming into Stanford, that I had like something to prove to myself of like I can compete with these people on an academic level. And so I really didn't do all that much like social stuff for the most part. It was like study, and I regret some of that to some degree.
If you had to do all of it, what would you do differently?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is I didn't appreciate the amount of like intellectual depth that just exists on campus, and I didn't really make an effort to interact with that many of my peers. Like I played like pickup basketball, and so that's where a lot of my friends came from. And I was a part of like some academic associations as well, and that was cool. But like I didn't develop that many like deep, meaningful relationships with people at Stanford, and I wish I would have done more of that. And I see some of my peers who did a really good job of that early on, and it has served them well, both personally and professionally. And also just like being in California, I didn't do any traveling. Like I just stayed in Palo Alto, and there's a lot to see in California. And so I had friends who would be like, hey, we're gonna go to SF, or we're gonna take a trip down to LA. And I would just like never engage in those things. I was like, I gotta focus. So I wish I would have done a little bit more, made some more experiences there.
Interesting.
I
found like a friend of mine kind of did a version of that, where, or the opposite of what you were just saying, what you wished that you had done. He got his MBA at MIT Sloan, and he was a little bit older, so he had more life experience, and he had a very like singular focus of why he's getting his MBA. He's like, I don't care about any of the grades, I don't care any about the classes, I only care about people. Because his analysis of the situation, I think somewhat first principles thinking is like, the value is going to be the network. I'm not going to remember my grades or anything. I'm going to remember my network, and they're going to remember how I made them felt. So he just dived into social, just like meeting with people, relationships, parties, etc. And I heard that, and I remember hearing jokes about MBAs of just like, it's where you go to party. And that is somewhat true, because to your point, it's like like now I'm like 10, 11 years out of MBA. A lot of them are in the high positions, and it's like that's a lot of the benefit of that time.
Right.
Me, I was actually a little bit different, because I was a political science undergrad, so I didn't know anything about business. So I actually did benefit, and I learned a lot from business school. But that is, I agree with you. I think like the value of people, and I would say that's not limited to school. It's, I think, just throughout your life. Like even right now as a professional, like,
Yeah.
networking is like so important.
Well, and that's even like with podcasting of why it's so valuable as well, is the relationships that I've built through my podcast, both for like personal nourishment and for professional opportunities, has been like incredible. And so, it's something I've only appreciated more and more as I've gotten older, but it's something I had to learn. And it's been a humbling experience because it's not the thing that is most natural to me, But yeah.
All right. So, post Stanford, then how did you end up at your next job?
Yeah. So I mean, things kind of played out how I hoped they would at the time, which is I got an internship at Goldman Sachs between my junior and senior year, and it was in their like wealth management division. And so I got a return offer, and I started my career at Goldman in Chicago.
And what does wealth management mean?
So, basically we were advising ultra high net worth individuals on how to manage their assets.
So what's the definition of ultra high net worth? Or like Elon Musk?
I mean, I would say the average client was probably around like 50 to 100 million in net worth. But then there were also a lot of people a handful of people that were like billionaires.
So would billionaires have like family offices?
They would. And like sometimes we would only be managing a portion of the assets, right? They'd have some at JP Morgan, they'd have some at Morgan Stanley to try and be like diversified.
Okay.
So yeah, it was a cool and eye-opening experience. And it was kind of more of the same in terms of my first year at Goldman. It was like heads down. All right, now I got to compete, kind of climb up the ranks as quickly as possible.
So you're continuing to compete from Stanford.
Yeah. And it wasn't like any malicious intent or anything like that. It was just more of I had high expectations for myself. And so it was like work from like 7 until like 6, and then I'd go to the gym, and then I'd eat dinner, and then I would study for the CFA because I was doing the CFA program. Because I was like, how do I continue to move up the ranks as quickly as possible? And the CFA is like a well-respected program. So that's what the first year and a half, 2 years looked like for me.
Okay.
And then I started to realize that.
Yeah, at what point? Was it a specific point or was it a gradual realization?
So the background is I started in wealth management, but then I switched to investment banking.
Okay.
And everybody, or not everybody, but it's well known that going the IB route gives you a lot more optionality from a career path perspective. And so I had told my boss at the time when I first started at Goldman, like, hey, my intention is I'm going to try and switch to investment banking, and I'm going to do a really good job for you, but I want to do that as quickly as possible. And my boss at the time was not so supportive of that effort because he wanted me to stay around on the team for a longer time period.
Got it.
Right? And so I ended up just like, I need to keep moving ahead, and I just made the switch on my own. So I was like networking internally, I was like having interactions with HR, and so I made that switch.
Did that burn any bridges?
I mean, he was probably disappointed, but he understood at the same time.
Disappointed at him like cock blocking you.
Yeah. Like I understood his angle as well, but my whole thing was like, well, how long am I going to just stick around here for? Like I've got to make moves. Like the time isn't slowing down for anybody. So I switched to investment banking, and then I just realized how poor of a work environment I had, and it was also during COVID, so we were like completely remote. And I didn't feel like it was worthwhile for me to continue to invest all of my time and energy into this career path if like 2, 3, 4 years from now, I was just not very enthusiastic or excited about the work that I was doing. And so I just kind of quit on the spot.
I mean, I feel like that's quite a big decision because it's quite a big like identity shift. because like we have results of what's the outcome, but those come from a series of habits that we've had, and those habits come from actions, and the actions come from a sense of belief that we have about ourselves or the world. And your belief was, I got to put in the work. I have high expectations for myself, and suddenly you do something it feels like very against that.
Yeah.
But how did that happen though? Or like why, I guess? And like what were you feeling when you were going through that?
I mean, I guess I just had a sense that like, in terms of meaning and purpose and my overall like passion for the career trajectory that I was on, like I had confidence that if I would have stuck around, that I could have slowly risen up the ranks and like made a lot of money in the process. But I also had a very like keen sense of like life's scarcity and how short life is. And I also didn't want to look back on my career not having taken advantage of certain opportunities where I felt like if I would have maybe taken a risk, my life could have been a lot more adventurous and interesting. And if I'm telling my kids or my grandkids about my life story, it's not just, oh yeah, I worked at Goldman Sachs for 20 years and then I decided to retire kind of a dynamic. But hopefully there's like some interesting twists and turns along the way. And I think you also kind of want to prove to yourself like what you're capable of, right? And so any time where I think a path becomes too obvious of what the outcome looks like, it becomes less interesting at that point, I think. There's something about like the uncertainty and the mystery of like what is possible that I think is really exciting and that gets me interested. And so it was both a combination of that intrigue that I had, and also a combination of like the dread and misery of just being in that job and realizing that I was just being burned out to some extent. Yeah.
So how did that lead to the next thing?
So I had mentioned that I was like a podcast addict, right?
Yeah.
And so there was one podcast that I listened to a lot called Invest Like the Best. And it was a very big, popular podcast for like investment professionals. And the host of that podcast, his name was Patrick O'Shaughnessy. And I had reached out to him and said, hey, I'm interested in your podcast and I've learned a lot from it. And if you're ever working on any new side projects, I'd love to contribute, like even if it's just on like a small part-time basis. And when I reached out, I think it was my senior year at Stanford, he had basically said like, hey, there's no opportunities right now, but I appreciate your interest.
But you shot your shot.
I shot my shot. And after I had left Goldman, there was an opportunity that came up, which was he, in conjunction with a few of his business partners, were going to be launching a startup. And because he had built a very extensive network in the investing space, he wanted to build kind of like a Twitter-like platform, but specifically for his investor network, right? So it was like venture capitalists, private equity guys, hedge fund guys, and he was going to bring them all into a podcast or onto this platform and start a startup. And so,
and did you stay in touch all these years, even while you were at Goldman?
I wasn't in close touch, but he knew of me. And I had applied to some roles that they had put out there.
Got it. Okay.
And I also had a mutual relationship with who became, like the person who became the CEO. I guess this just ensures that we'll have to do a round 2 at some point.
Yeah, I know. All right, say it again. What happened?
Now we're walking across this bridge and...
This is the second time you're saying this.
We get stopped by 2, I guess they're Air Force officers.
Wow, right? Very perceptive of you.
And we caught a snippet of this Air Force building that apparently were prohibited from filming. And so they stopped us, took a look at the footage. You had to go through the whole rigmarole of chopping off that 2 seconds where the building was in there.
It was more like 5-10 seconds, to be fair.
Yeah.
A 14-minute clip.
We got stopped for what? It was like 15 minutes or something like that. But yeah, it was fun.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, what were we were talking about you, dude, I don't remember. It was at the startup. It was at the startup, talking about your experience there. And then I asked you like, did you feel like it was the right direction? You said it was a step. It was a step.
Yeah.
In a direction.
Yeah, it was an important step in that, like, outside of the Goldman ecosystem, I think the one thing that I didn't appreciate as much or didn't realize is that all of my energy, time, like relationship base was all tied into the ecosystem of Goldman, because that's where I started my career. And it was actually a very good learning lesson for me, because like when I left that ecosystem, I realized like I didn't have anything that was my own, you know? I didn't have my own intellectual property. I didn't have my own like distribution. And the fact that if you do work for a corporation, I think you just have to come to terms and appreciate the fact that you are contributing to something that is potentially not your own, right? And so,
and most people don't care. Like that's why they're paying me. But why did you realize I don't want to, or I want to do something different?
Well, I guess I didn't know. I knew that the Goldman atmosphere, or where my life was heading on that path, was longer term, not where I ultimately wanted to be. Just in terms of my values had maybe shifted,
right?
Or my understanding of the money and the money alone was like not what I was looking for.
Right.
And then I also I had found this new startup, and startup world is much different than corporate world.
A little
right?
bit.
And it's also like, it's scary, but it's also empowering to some extent, that if you have an idea and you have a group of people that will kind of support you and building something from scratch, like that's a very freeing thing. And the amount of agency that you have over a project is such a cool thing. And so it got me much more interested in like just building and creating and finding other like-minded people. So it was a whole different world that kind of opened up to me, you know, and that was important. I didn't have it all figured out for sure, but I knew that like I was moving in the right direction.
Was it like a slow burn, or was it like a lightning bolt?
I would say the first 2 months or so was probably like more of a lightning bolt dynamic. It's kind of hard to navigate exactly like, there are no standard operating procedures, right? There is no, somebody tells me, hey, create a marketing document, and there is no framework that I need to follow. So that can be very disorienting, you know? And so for the first couple of months, it was not having that structure was kind of scary. But then I'd say after that first 2-month period, I got more comfortable, and it was more of a slow burn dynamic.
Did you feel like the element of you wanting to create things and create your own thing, do you think it was always there and this just helped uncover it? Or do you think it started forming here at this point?
That's a good question. I don't even know if I know the answer, to be honest. I mean, I think that even maybe when I was at Stanford or at Goldman, just like having more agency was something that became more consequential for me. And this was like the opportunity for me to validate that that's like a really important thing in terms of my own life, right?
Did you have hunches though? Even when you were in the, even when you were in the system, did you have like hints of like, I might be in the matrix?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, your boss tells you to do something and you don't agree with the reasons why they're telling you to do it, or you just think it's useless and a waste of your time. And that, those are hints of like, okay, this is not the right spot for me to be in,
I think so, like, even more so like what we were just talking about of your non-traditional, even if it were just for 3 years, you said it was impactful. I mean, I think maybe one way it was impactful is like, you went out of the system. You went out of one of the biggest systems, which is the school system. And your mom introduced there's a different way of doing things. And I think you have the benefit of seeing that is even an option. Whereas most people, like Korea is a great example. A lot of them don't feel there's an option. It's you have to go through this path. But even just knowing, I think some people don't even know there's an option out there. But even if they know of it, they would be scared of it. But you knew of it, well, because you were forced to do it, because your mom. But you experienced it, and now you get to like, it's like that one seed of like, I was different, and we didn't crash and die. Like, maybe that could be extrapolated to other areas of our lives.
And it was definitely, I was being fed examples through the podcast that I was listening to. Like sometimes I would listen to podcasts and they were like career-related podcasts of like how somebody did a career pivot or how somebody made a radical decision. And the more of those examples that you get exposed to, the more you think, maybe there is an alternative path, right? Whereas if you're never fed examples, you don't even know that it is possible. You don't think it's a thing.
You don't even look for it.
Yeah.
Because you don't even know it's there.
Yeah. And so I had started to get just following people on Twitter as well. And you see examples of people that are, making these radical changes, going independent, and you get fed enough of those examples and you're like, man, maybe I should do this for myself.
Yeah.
So new desires start to form.
Yeah, and I think new beliefs start change, and then once again, like you start going more from an analogy to first principles of like, and you start challenging assumptions. Like, do I have to live life this way?
Yep. And I think it also depends on where you're at, like psychologically, and what kind of personality you have. Because I see some people that all they want to do is they want to get their monthly paycheck and clock out. Right? They have other priorities in their life, and their job is just a means to an end for the most part. And to some extent, like I get it, and I don't look down on those people necessarily. You know, there was somebody at Goldman who I respected a great deal, and he could have climbed the corporate ranks faster if he wanted to make an effort, but he realized like this is just a job, and what I care about is like getting home to my family on time and investing my time and energy there. And originally when I was like having conversations with him or just observing him in the workplace, I was like, why is this guy not moving up the ranks faster? Because he's so good at his job. And I realized like he knew the game that he was playing, right? And he knew like he didn't want more and more and more. And he was very happy with kind of where he was at in life. And so, I appreciated that about him. But I think there's other people as well who, there's something weird, there's something scary about having agency and having responsibility. And some people are much more comfortable having a boss that tells them exactly what to do. And they clock in at 8 o'clock in the morning, they clock out at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and they go home and they get their paycheck. And that security is like a very important part of their life, And so, I get why, there are some people in a very different mindset.
Yeah, and me too. I think kind of like what I realized is, I think that's the beautiful thing about life. That's the beautiful thing about free will, is that we're all on our own journey. And they may be like that for the rest of their lives, because they were just made like that. And some of them, it just might not be their time yet. You sprout seeds, and seeds mature for a variety of different reasons. And so I used to judge. I used to be like, dude, are you serious? Like, come on, you got to break out of that. You're in the matrix, bro. You got to get out of it. But now I'm realizing everyone has their own journey. And everyone has their own time. And I think it's a beautiful thing, whether they're sprouting or not.
Well, it's funny because, if 20-year-old me were to, or 27-year-old me were to tell my 20-year-old self like what I'm doing right now, he would have been like, "You're crazy. That's not even a possibility. That's insanity."
Same with me.
And but that's the way that life works sometimes, and so it's cool.
By the way, it is past 6:30.
Okay. I guess we can just. This is the station over here, right?
Yep.
So we can just keep recording until we head back, or
let's do it.
Whatever.
If you have to get to the subway station, right? Okay, so I don't know if can you get to the subway station from here? I actually don't know. You might be able to. Okay, then lightning round. What brings you here? What brought you here to Korea? And this experiment?
To be honest, I don't even know if I know the answer to that for sure. It was partly a curiosity about the culture, curiosity about my heritage, and also there were some projects that came up that I wanted to pursue. And so one of those projects that I'm thinking of starting a startup around is, and maybe it's related to some of your like passions as well, is there are 7 million people in the Korean diaspora, and for some reason there is no like centralized community or online database of like the cool people in the Korean diaspora doing cool stuff.
When you say diaspora, how would you define that?
So originally I defined it as people of Korean heritage that are not living in Korea.
Got it.
Right, so like me, Korean diasporas, or Korean American diaspora is big.
There's Uzbekistan, I didn't even know.
Uzbekistan, I just met a Korean Uzbekistan guy recently today.
Crazy.
Yeah, so I come across people in their 20s and their 30s, and mostly Korean Americans, who feel maybe a little bit disconnected to their culture, but they're really proud of their Korean heritage. And I don't know why, some sort of community connecting everybody in the Korean diaspora doesn't exist. And that also, I think, my passion is kind of to what we were speaking about of Korean society and culture needs to adapt and develop if they're going to continue to prosper in the future, is can I slowly expose some Koreans to this new community of people that are living life in a very different way from the traditional ecosystem.
Just so they can see.
Just so they can see there's other career paths available.
And it might not be for them, it might not be their timing, but maybe your job is just to plant the seed.
Exactly. And so, I've been here for 4 weeks now. I've probably met somewhere between like 25 and 30 people in Korea. Some of them with very different backgrounds, but all of them have been like, one, this thing doesn't really exist of like a internet community for the Korean diaspora. And two is like, if I built it, that they would be interested in contributing to it and being a part of it. And so I'm thinking of like basically launching a kind of like a paid online community of like Koreans helping Koreans and connecting with each other.
Let's go.
And seeing where that goes, because online communities for me has been like super impactful in my life, and with whether it's podcasting or like these learning communities that I've been a part of. And I think there's a big opportunity for me to try and experiment with this.
Do you think it's your zone of genius?
I think it could be. That's
a beautiful thing, man. I think I love seeing people in their zone of genius in that moment. And by the way, like, I actually, when you said you're going to podcast for the rest of your life, I think that's cool. I don't know if that's necessarily the goal in itself. Like, I think it's more like you're podcasting right now, but you can change and develop in the future. And I think that's like a beautiful thing. So like, right now, your season is that, but it could be something else, or it could be the same. But I think it's more so what is impressive is just the willingness and desire to want to, you know what I mean? Like, look for that thing. Look for your zone of genius, because most people are not even looking for it.
Yeah. Well, a natural community has built up from the podcast that I had started.
By the way, I don't know if this is where the subway is.
Okay.
Let's take a quick check.
Yeah, no worries.
Let's take a quick check.
Let's see.
It's a quick one. Because I want to make sure you get to where you need to go. You need to get to Yongsan Station.
What was the other station? This Shinyongsan Station is not too far as well.
Okay, actually, we might be on the right way. Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure.
No, I appreciate it.
Okay. Anyway.
No, I was saying, like, even the podcast that I've been doing has been a community builder in and of itself. And like, there have been people that started businesses because I connected them with people that I had interviewed, which is really cool. And my hope is that when I'm building this like Korean ecosystem as well, that I could create like a dedicated podcast for, sharing cool stories of people in the Korean diaspora just doing cool stuff. And that would be an amplifier, because communities, I think, need to have some deep relationships, and like podcasting is maybe one of the few ways in which you can develop like deep relationships with people. Is like, TikTok and Instagram shorts and all that stuff. It's like, it's cool, but you're not really developing a relationship with the creator. Whereas with podcasting, if you're listening to an interview or a conversation, you actually feel like you know those people.
I think it's interesting, when we were reading this book, The Creative Act, so one of the people that were reading, she's like, I love this book. I love this book. And she's like, it feels like I am having a conversation with the author. So I thought that was like a really interesting point that she was bringing up. And you talk about having conversations. So like, I think the benefit of a book is it's asynchronous, and you can, at any point, podcast is asynchronous too. But I think with books, you can go kind of deeper. But the benefit of the podcast is you get to see the person. You get to see the person. You get to see in real time some of the ideas like being sharpened as they're being given questions that they didn't think about. And I think the spontaneity of it and the roughness of it is kind of the draw. And through that, you actually get to see a glimpse of not the polished self, but the real self that's figuring it out in real time. And I think like through that, you feel like you get to see a glimpse of them that the public doesn't see. It's just like, only we get to see this part. Only the people who are willing to watch the podcast.
Right. And I think there's something very special about the auditory stimulus of the human voice dimension is like, maybe if you were to characterize like, to what degree do you know a person is like having had a conversation with them is like a very real way of knowing that person, right? Just seeing their, like, seeing photos or seeing Instagram reels, any of that stuff, it's like you don't really know that person that well. But I think as soon as you can see what that person looks like and you can hear their voice and you can see how they interpersonally interact with somebody, you feel like you know them a lot better, you know? So for relationship building, I think it's definitely the way to go.
What do you think is going to be the thing that tells you, yes, I'm going to spend another 6 months, a year here in Korea, or the thing that's be like, it's time for me to move on?
I mean, ultimately, I'm gonna launch a website. I'm going to pitch this idea to a handful of people. I've already been doing that to some extent. My thinking is like, there are, Korean student associations or Korean American student associations at every major university. And I'm gonna reach out to the presidents and say, of all those respective universities, and say, hey, I'm building a bridge for the Korean diaspora. And my suspicions are, if they decided to become a president of their Korean association, that they would be passionate about furthering like the Korean cause. And so, if people are willing to pay $25 per year to be a part of this ecosystem, right? And I can get like 400, 500 people onto this platform just through that outreach, then it signals that like I'm onto something, right? And I think I've already gotten data points, maybe not enough data points, but data points that tell me I should continue to try this, because it seems like there is an appetite, and especially from the, I guess, English-speaking Koreans who are a little bit more open-minded, is they feel like there is a lack of community or a lack of opportunities, and they're very like depressed or sad. And they, from them, it seems like if there was another culture or community or ecosystem that they could be a part of, where there's more hope for the future, then it would be valuable to them. So, unless I see something that says, hey, this isn't going to work, or this isn't something that people are willing to pay for, then I would change course. But so far, it seems like I should still continue to try and build this.
Yeah. No, that's cool, man. And I think from that front of like, I think having a heart for Korea and having a love for Korea, even though like we're not of Korea, we are of Korea, but we're not. And to be able to be that bridge and to be able to like serve Korea in this sense, of trying to do something like using our lives, our energy, our skills, our resources, our talents. I think it's like a really honorable thing that's really meaningful that people may not understand the full value right now. Even Koreans might be like, I don't need to listen to that. Like, or there could be some who are open, but the point is, the nice thing about like this podcast and community and stuff is it goes on. Like we don't know once you spread the seeds how it's gonna sprout.
And I mean, you're not the first person that I have met that either is spending some time in Korea as a non-Korean. Like there's a bunch of other people that I've met that have come back to Korea and they have like a heart for Korea and are like worried about its future. And so, I don't think this is a me only type thing. I think there's so much positive some value that can be attained if people start to build, a community. So it's cool for me to see, you doing stuff like this.
Well, Tyger, it's been an awesome, past 2 hours. Even the part where we got stopped by the military. But yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for hanging out. And maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point. We can get. Oh, and then I'll go on your podcast if you want me.
Please.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
This is your stop.
All right,
dude, brother.
It's been awesome.
Here we go. Cut.